Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. Well, vaccines have been in the news recently. The development of at least two apparently very efficient vaccines against COVID-19 and others promised on the way has produced a lot of excitement. Some people see this as a real answer of prayer. Other people see it as a dangerous tool of Satan, afraid that vaccines are going to be the mark of the beast or something that will be imposed upon people to force them to behave in particular ways. I'll be honest with you. I've got a cruise booked next year for myself and Janice for our 35th wedding anniversary, a cruise around the Greek islands. And if they say we've got to have a vaccine to go on that cruise, before they finish saying it, I'll already have my sleeve rolled up saying, give me the shot. Why am I so cavalier about it? Well, quite simply, like most people who've traveled to other countries on missionary work, I have no problem with the idea that a vaccination might be necessary for you to go certain places or do certain things. I've traveled frequently to Africa and Asia, two countries where there is yellow fever. And it's one of the conditions. You cannot enter those countries unless you have been vaccinated against yellow fever. In fact, if you arrive without your yellow fever vaccination certificate, you have to join another line where a local doctor will charge you $50 to vaccinate you, something I don't want to happen. So I make sure I have my certificate with me. My vaccination for yellow fever is well in place. So another vaccination wouldn't cause me any problems whatsoever. Now, it's interesting that the whole practice of vaccination came about because of a committed Christian. You know, many of the pioneers in medical science and other forms of science, the reason why they pioneered their discoveries was because of their faith in God. They believed that if the world was evidence that God is a God of order, he had processes in place, and we were not just to say, oh gosh, it's a mystery, but we could discover the ways and the workings of God by examining his world. And Edward Jenner was a country doctor, and according to an email that I received fairly recently from evangelist J. John, he says that Edward Jenner probably saved more lives than any other human being in history. Well, how on earth did that happen? Well, this Christian doctor, a man who greatly treasured the Bible and biblical truth, he was treating a milkmaid one day, and he said she had to be careful about getting smallpox because there was an outbreak. And she said, we milkmaids, we don't get smallpox because we've had cowpox. And he said, what? She said, oh yeah, it's well known. Any of us that have contracted this disease of the cows, cowpox, we can't catch smallpox. Well, he thought that's amazing. So he decided to experiment with this, and he had another milkmaid, a young girl called Sarah Nelms, who had cowpox on her hand. She had some pustules on her hand, the same hand she used to milk the cow. And her cow was named Blossom, and Blossom had the cowpox disease. So what Edward Jenner did, he took some scrapings from these pustules of cowpox on her hands, and he got his gardener's son, an 8-year-old boy called James Phipps, and scratched his arm and rubbed the cowpox into his arm. So the boy developed a little rash of cowpox. And then Edward Jenner deliberately put smallpox into the wound a few days later. I mean, look, today this guy would be struck off as a doctor for life for doing this. But he discovered that James Phipps was now immune to smallpox because the cowpox had vaccinated him. The word vaccinate comes from the Latin word vacca, meaning a cow. That's where it comes from this experiment by Edward Jenner. And therefore, if you could vaccinate enough people, a disease could not gain traction among that population of people, and they would have, again, thinking of the cows, what was called herd immunity. And that's what they did with smallpox. Smallpox went from being one of the most feared diseases with a mortality rate of between 10% and 20% to being totally eradicated from the world in 1980. You know, as a young boy growing up in the UK, I was vaccinated against smallpox. Today, nobody has to be vaccinated. Smallpox no longer exists. It's gone because of Edward Jenner. Now, that the same process that he had discovered was later used against other diseases, sadly not always developed quickly enough because Jenner's own wife died of tuberculosis in 1825. And you know, tuberculosis was another disease that used to be tremendously prevalent in Ireland. And in 1922, at the foundation of the Irish state, there were over 4,600 people died of tuberculosis in Ireland. Today, well, we don't have people dying of tuberculosis in Ireland. Why? Because we had a vaccination program. And that vaccination program produced herd immunity. And today, we don't have to worry, and nobody has to be vaccinated against TB in Ireland anymore. I mean, you know, it's wonderful, the effect that this one Christian man who wanted to explore this wonderful world that God had made and understand it better came to save millions and millions of lives. Join us again for another Take 5 tomorrow. We're going to be looking at another scientific pioneer who was inspired by their Christian faith.